Welcome to Wine, Whiskey, and Song, where we explore the connections we make with wine, with whiskey, and with music. Here's Andy Wesley and Tom Roper.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to our next episode of Wine, Whiskey, and Song. I'm Andy Wesley. This is Tom Roper. As you know, so far, we've done 3 episodes talking about wine in terms of the grape, the soil, and climate. Our last episode on wine for this year was going to talk about the human element. How do winemakers and vineyard managers take all of those inputs and all of those things that have been created by the grape, the soil, the climate, and create wine with them? And when we look at the human element and what humans bring to the process, it's all about decisions. There are an endless number of decisions. In the vineyard, decisions about where to plant your vineyard, what side of the hill to plant. Once you plant, what grape varietals are you going to plant? Are you going to prune? Are you going to drop fruit during harvest? All of these things are decisions that are made year in and year out in the vineyard in a combination of the winemaker and the vineyard manager. Then, once the grapes are harvested and they come into the winery, there are an infinite number of decisions about what we're going to do to treat that fruit. How long is the fermentation going to last? Are we going to keep the grapes cold during fermentation, slowing the fermentation process down? And are we going to age in barrels? What type of barrels, etc.? So humans really bring an infinite number of decisions to the process. So what questions or comments do you have, Tom, before we talk specifically about some of those decisions and this wine today?
I mean, it just strikes me as how much, even though you've got these controlled elements, the controlled ingredients going in, how different the output can be based on that human element in the process.
Sure.
Making all these just multitude of decisions, which is really fascinating.
Sure. Yeah, and we talked a little bit in one of the previous episodes about old world winemaking versus new world winemaking. The old world, think of Europe. From a wine perspective, when we talk about the old world, we're talking about Europe. France, Italy, Germany, Spain. When we talk about the new world, we're talking about the US, Australia, New Zealand, Chile, Argentina. And the identity of wine between the old world and the new world is a little bit different. As we talked about before, in the old world, everything is about place. A lot of times the wines are named after the place that they come from, right? So climate and soil, that idea of the French term terroir, the sense of place, really determines everything that happens from that point on. And winemaking from an old world perspective is really about taking all of the elements that the place gave us and not screwing anything up. In the new world, wines are much more focused on the grape and the winemaker. So there's a lot more manipulation, if you will, or finding flavors that are not necessarily prevalent to start with. We had talked in a previous episode about Chardonnay and things like malolactic fermentation. Malolactic fermentation is a bacterial process. It's not really a fermentation. It's a transition which takes malic acid, which is the kind of acid that you find in green apples, and converts it to lactic acid, which is the kind of acid that you find in butter. This is why Chardonnays taste buttery. That is winemaking. You can allow malolactic fermentation to happen or not allow malolactic fermentation to happen, and that's going to have a huge impact on the style of wine that you make. The other thing that is very key from a winemaking perspective is if you ask an old world winemaker why they do something, if you ask a winemaker in Burgundy why he does something, he'll say, because that's how my dad did it. And that's how his dad did it, and that's how his dad did it. That's how we do things here. New world winemaking is much more scientific. oh, I'm doing that because I learned it at UC Davis in my winemaking class, and I'm taking raw materials and changing them so that they create the outcome that I'm looking for. Neither process is right or wrong. It's just a different philosophy. And old world winemakers, to a large extent, will tell you that wine is made in the vineyard. And once harvest happens, we're going to bring the grapes into the winery, but most of the work that can be done is already done. We're just going to allow things to happen the way that nature wants them to happen and make sure that nothing goes wrong. Whereas in New World winemaking, we tend to find winemakers who are willing to say, I'm going to make this wine taste this way by using this technique.
Right.
Whether that's fermentation time or a particular malolactic conversion or something like that. Are we going to age in oak or not age in oak? And so a lot of those choices are prevalent in both Old World and New World winemaking, but what dictates what choice you're going to make has a lot to do with your perspective. This is why in the New World, if you look at a wine label, we talk about the grape that the wines come from, and winemakers in the New World are sort of rock stars, right? Winemakers are, so and so made this wine. In the Old World, in Burgundy or in Chianti or something like that, if you asked who made the wine, they would be like, well, the vineyard made the wine, the place made the wine, right? And the winemaker was the person responsible for making sure that nothing went wrong at that point. So the wine that we're going to talk about today, I chose a rosé specifically because there are things about rosé winemaking that are a little different than either red wine or white wine. This Whispering Angel Chateau d'Esclans Whispering Angel Rosé from Provence. As you're probably aware, Provençal rosés have become very popular in the last 5 or 6 years. And the key here is that we're taking a blend of grapes, most of them red. Rosés are usually made with red grapes. The way that you make a rosé is you take red grapes and limit skin contact, because if you remember back to our original episode, all of the color and much of the flavor in a red grape is actually in the skins. So we tend to plant thinner skinned red grapes in areas where we're going to make rosé. This wine is mostly a grape called Cinsault and then some Grenache, both red grapes. And then there's a little bit of Rolle, R-O-L-L-E, Rolle, which is the same grape from Italy that you might know as Vermentino. And those 3 grapes are blended together. There's a very limited amount of skin contact under very cold conditions in order to lock in flavor and gather a certain amount of color. And part of the reason why rosé winemaking is so interesting is we take red grapes, and then once we extract a little bit of color, we tend to treat them like white wines. Back to one of the previous episodes, as we had mentioned before, because all of the color and most of the flavor in a red grape is in the skins, when we make red wine, we ferment the red wine with the skins, the juice and the skins. When you make white wine, you press off, you crush the grapes, you press off the juice, and you only ferment the juice. Why? Because we're less concerned with color. In this particular case, we're actually cold soaking and starting fermentation with the skins in contact with the juice, and then removing the skins early in the process, which is why you get this beautiful pink orange sort of color in rosé. And then the other big difference between these rosés and rosés in the past, particularly White Zinfandel in the U.S. If you remember back to White Zinfandel, White Zinfandel was a red grape, the Zinfandel grape, and then they would ferment the juice sweet. And that sweetness covered up a lot of the really interesting flavor in the Zinfandel grape. One of the things that you'll notice when you taste this is fermented dry. All of the yeast has eaten all of the sugar to create a dry wine. And because of that, we're getting a lot of those really interesting fruit flavors, as well as a lot of acidity, which makes this wine very good for serving with food. So dry rosés have become very popular in the United States. A lot of them from Provence, other places where rosés are grown. Spain is a big area for rosé, the Rhone Valley in France, but Provençal rosés are probably the most popular at this point. And this Whispering Angel is one of, if not the best-selling rosés in the United States at this point because of that real bright fruit flavor profile. So what do you taste in this wine?
Oh, I'm getting, I'd say, similar in profile to like a Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc. Melon, grapefruit.
Yep, high acidity.
Yeah.
So you're getting a lot of those things that you would associate with
Citrus
and
yeah.
with high acidity. Grenache in particular tends to have a little bit more raspberry and a little bit more red fruit. So the Grenache and the Cinsault are going to bring some red berry flavors, but a lot of crispness and acidity here. So beautiful, great wines for the patio on a Saturday afternoon, or grilled foods. You can pair rosés with a lot of different things. And as I said, the reason why this is as bright and fruity as it is because in the winery, they're keeping the juice very cold, because remember, fermentation creates heat and throws off heat and carbon dioxide. So if we chill the grapes down, and first of all make sure that fermentation doesn't start before we want it to, and then keep it cool as we're creating skin contact with the fruit, we can lock in a lot of those bright fruit flavors.
Oh, okay. And that's where I would imagine a lot of that human element comes into play, where someone's making the decision of how cold, how long to leave the skins in, leave that skin contact going. Not to mention the specific blend of individual grapes.
Sure.
30% this, 20% that, and 50% that, or some combination.
Well, and that blending process, most of the time when we're talking about blends, we ferment each of the grapes separately and then blend them afterwards.
Interesting.
That
okay.
the blend on this wine year to year is probably pretty similar. There's always Cinsault, there's always Grenache, there's always Roll, but the percentage of each of those grapes, to your point, might change year to year because a winemaker will always have a plan going in of what they think is going to happen, but then the art and the science of winemaking is about making those subtle changes during the process to make sure that we get the final result that we're looking for.
Yeah, interesting. So here's an old rumor. You mentioned white Zinfandel that I think we talked about before. And I don't know if we talked about this, but the thing that I'd always heard about white Zinfandel, that it was the result of a happy accident in fermentation. And I don't know if there's any truth to that rumor, if that is just urban legend.
Yeah, it probably originally it was,
like
somebody had...
hey, that's pretty good.
Yeah, and then it became a huge wave. A lot of times, things that become very overt winemaking decisions were, to your point, an accident. We left the grapes the skins in contact with the grapes a little longer than we expected to. In contact with the juice a little longer than we expected to, and we got something that was very interesting.
Yeah.
Because of that, winemakers will always keep track of everything that happens in a particular year, just in case that mistake turns into something interesting.
Right.
And some of it is, some of it is very, very precise, and some of it is I don't know, let's try this and see what happens. You know, and you get a lot of, very interesting flavors that come out of things like that, and they turn into a new style of wine. So this Provençal style rosé, they've been making wine this way in Provence for a long time, but as it's become more popular, one of the other things that happens in winemaking a lot is there's something about this wine that people like quite a bit. Let's try to figure out what it is that they like so that we can duplicate it.
Yes.
You brought up Marlborough Sauvignon Blanc earlier. That style of Sauvignon Blanc is relatively new. 1985 was the first time that Cloudy Bay Sauvignon Blanc was shipped from New Zealand to the United States and London. And that style of winemaking, allowing the Sauvignon Blanc to get just a little bit riper, has literally changed the way that Sauvignon Blanc is made all over the world. The style of Sauvignon Blanc is very different now. And if you taste California Sauvignon Blanc or Chilean Sauvignon Blanc or even French Sauvignon Blanc, a lot of it tastes a lot more like Marlborough than it used to, because they realized that if we allow the fruit to hang on the vine a little bit longer and then treat it in a certain way, when it gets to the winery, we get results that people are very interested in.
Again, human element.
Absolutely.
In that process.
Absolutely.
Same grape climates, et cetera, and humans are saying, well, let's do this to get this specific result.
Sure.
Or try to get the specific result, at least.
And to make the connection that we've been trying to make to music, from my perspective, winemaking is about telling a story. It's about telling a story that was created from the grape, soil, climate that was given, and what story are we going to tell? From a songwriting perspective, you take a particular rhythm and a particular chord progression and a particular melody, and you add lyrics to complete the story. The song that we're going to play for you today is a song that this song was recorded in 1975. Stevie Nicks wrote the song for her previous band, Buckingham Nicks. And then when Lindsey Buckingham and Stevie Nicks joined Fleetwood Mac, this song became at least part of, if not the impetus for sort of the new Fleetwood Mac sound. And it tells a story. Stevie Nicks had read a book about a Welsh woman who was haunted by and then literally taken over by a witch named Rhiannon, and her man fell in love with the witch. And this song is called Rhiannon. It has obviously all of the qualities that we've talked about before. Really, really interesting rhythm. Sort of a there's a heartbeat, and there's a really interesting guitar riff that Lindsey Buckingham plays, and Tom does a great job playing, which sort of recurring brings us back to that story. Really, really simple chord progression, enhanced by that riff, and then the Stevie tells the story in a very sort of mystical way, the way that she, told a lot of things. You don't hear about the witch, you just hear about how Rhiannon made, the man in this particular story feel, and how he kept on coming back to it. So,
yeah, and it's a like you said, the chords are simple, but they're voiced in such a way, like Lindsey Buckingham voiced it in a way to like with the it's basically an A minor to an F major seventh, and that major seventh, that open E note on the top string really, I don't know, just kind of evokes this. It evokes a sound in a space.
Yep.
That it just, I don't know, really like fits with the theme and the lyrics so well.
Yeah.
a relatively simple song, but just the human element made that into what it is. Just a brilliant song.
Sure.
Speaking of human element, I think Lindsey Buckingham, just a note, highly generally underrated guitarist.
Oh,
Just
absolutely.
amazing.
Absolutely. And I think it would be interesting to ask him, and I haven't looked into it, but there's probably an interview someplace where he talked about it, whether you mentioned the voicing of using the F major 7 rather than the F. I wonder if that was the way that the song was originally written,
That would be
or
interesting,
if
yeah.
that riff that he came up with, he was like, hey, can we change this to F major 7 because I've got this really cool riff that I want to add.
Yeah.
That, if when you hear this riff, when you hear this song start playing, the first thing that you hear is the riff.
Yeah.
You don't hear the melody, you don't hear the story, you don't hear Stevie's voice, you hear that riff, and that's what sort of
Draws you right in.
Draws you
It's
right
just-
in.
yeah.
I saw something on Facebook a while back. What is a song that makes you turn up the radio every time you hear it? This is definitely one of those songs,
Yeah.
and it's because of the riff, not because of the melody or the chord progression or the lyrics, which come later. But it draws you in such a way, in such a haunting sort of way that it makes it almost impossible to turn this song off once it starts playing.
And it's such a simple riff, but iconic. Everyone, exactly what's coming when you hear those first couple of notes.
Yep.
You know exactly what it is.
Yep.
Every time I've played this live, I've been playing this song probably for 25 years. And every time I played it live, the crowd always instantly reacts to those first few notes in that riff.
Yep.
Everyone knows exactly what's coming.
Yep. Well, we're gonna move on and play the Fleetwood Mac song "Rhiannon," written by Stevie Nicks. I do want to mention that this song was a request. We actually had something else that we were planning on doing in this spot, and somebody saw a previous episode of Wine, Whiskey, and Song and asked us if we would play and sing Rhiannon. So you know who you are, and this is for you. This is Rhiannon.
Rhiannon rings like a bell through the night, and wouldn't you love to love her? Takes to the sky like a bird in flight, and who will be her lover? All your life you've never seen a woman taken by the wind. Would you stay if she promised you heaven? Will you ever win? She is like a cat in the dark, and then she is the darkness. She rules her life like a fine skylark, and when the sky is starless. All your life you've never seen a woman taken by the wind. Would you stay if she promised you heaven? Will you ever win? Will you ever win? Yeah.
We'll see you again.
Cheers.
Thanks for joining us. We'll be back soon with another episode of Wine, Whiskey, and Song. In the meantime, please like the video and leave any comments you have. And of course, subscribe to our channel.